Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I'm going to talk about heroes again. I'm going to tie it in with something that happened recently both on the Marvel website and the DC website, but primarily I'm just going to talk about heroes because I love to talk about heroes. Sometimes I get comments like, "Do you have a point with your videos?" or "Why do you ramble so much?" Why? Because I like to talk about heroes. Sometimes I really do have a point. Sometimes I really do have a point. But today, all I hope to do is to look at the future of Marvel and DC by looking at the past of Marvel and DC and how each of those universes develops characters and why, because of how they develop their characters, I believe that DC is simply going to outlast Marvel. So I'll start off by asking you the question that I really asked myself, and it's that, do you really think that there is going to be X-Men comics or Fantastic Four comics or even Spider-Man comics in 50 years? Now, if you asked me that question 10 years ago, I would say sure, no problem. But looking at it today, I'm not so sure anymore. I would probably say more no than yes. 60-40, it's not going to be here. But then I asked myself that question about DC. Do you think in 50 years there's going to be Superman comics? Or Batman comics? Or Green Lantern? Or Flash? My answer is a resounding yes. It's a 90% yes. I would say that will be the case. But with Marvel, I really can't say. I'm thinking no. And what happened on both the Marvel website and the DC website was something that was sort of parallel for both of these companies that I thought was really funny that came out at the same time. On the DC website, you had a massive push for Young Justice. You had this push because they had the new series that's coming out. Well, it's the third season of the old series after how many years? I think it's like 8 years. And they had a comic coming out along with it. And their little blurb on their website was, "You thought that the Teen Titans were the Junior Justice League? You're wrong. It's Young Justice." And that was their selling point. This is the new Justice League. This is the Young Justice League. And at the same time, you had on the Marvel website them putting out things for their new Champions #1 because the Champions had to be canceled and they're trying to drive up the numbers again by putting out a new #1. And what they had on the Marvel website was, let's look at the history of the Champions. They began their origin in the all-new, all-different Avengers. That's not me saying that. That's Marvel saying that. So we're looking at these two teams. You have Young Justice, who DC is now touting as the Young Justice League. And you have the Champions, which Marvel, at the same time, was touting as the New Avengers. They were the New Avengers. They simply just made themselves a new team, but they're going to be your future Avengers. This is the take on both of these teams given by both of these companies. So what got me to ask that other question, to begin with, I started to ask myself this question. Do you think in 15 years Young Justice is going to be around? Do you think in 15 years Champions is going to be around? Let's make it simpler. Let's make it a dichotomy. If in 15 years one of these teams is going to be around, which one do you think it's more likely going to be? I would say Young Justice. And since there is a cartoon coming out with Young Justice as well, and Marvel has a similar cartoon which is not called The Champions but is called Marvel Rising, let's look at those two teams. If you had to pick one of those two teams, which one of those two teams do you think will be around in 15 years? Which one of those two teams do you think is more likely to become the new Justice League or the new Avengers? Again, I gotta say, to me, I think it would be Young Justice. And again, that got me thinking about the nature of these heroes in these two different universes and how DC is just going to outlast Marvel. That's what's going to happen. They're just going to outlast them. And I do believe it's in the way that they develop characters, and it's in the way that they treat their heroes. And it's much more, I don't know how else to say this, but much more conservative at DC. It's slow and laborious, and they don't just do like they do at Marvel and throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. They have a process and they go through it, and it's painstaking, and they don't do as good as Marvel when times are really good, but when times get bad, they don't fall anywhere near as far as Marvel either. I'd say that's what's going to happen. you're going to have DC just outlast these characters, because DC has a history of actually switching out its characters. It doesn't always work. Sometimes they have to change things back, but they have a history of it actually working in their universe. I don't even remember when it was. Was it the 50s or the 60s when they changed out Green Lantern and Flash? And they also changed Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman at that time. But they changed out the Flash and they changed out Green Lantern to entirely new characters. And they stuck. Superman and Batman, they just switched around just a little bit with their traits. Wonder Woman they tried to change and it didn't work. They had to change it back. But eventually, those two characters, Green Lantern and Flash, that worked. And if you look at the 80s, when they tried it again, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. I'm thinking about Wally West as Flash. When Crises came along and Barry Allen died in that heroic way, I did not want Wally West to be the Flash. But I bought Flash from #1, and after reading a whole year of Wally West Flash, Wally West was Flash to me. And by the way, right now, with them bringing back Barry Allen, I don't like that at all. Wally West is Flash. Barry Allen is gone. And so it worked for Flash. It didn't work for Green Lantern. When they tried to put, Kyle in the new Green Lantern spot, yeah, that didn't work. And prior to that, when they tried to do it with Guy Gardner, it didn't work. And prior to that, when they tried to do it with John Stewart, it didn't work. So they had to change it back. And I think with those two characters, we see why it works and why it doesn't. Because with Wally West, the entire first almost 2 years, you had Wally trying to fill the boots of Barry Allen. He was trying to be that same hero. Most of the entire first year, he was trying to vibrate through walls because he said to himself, Barry could do this. Why can't I do this? I should be able to do this. And he tried and he tried and he tried. And what he was trying to do was he was trying to live up to his namesake of Flash. And at the same time, in trying to do that, he developed into his own separate hero. And to me, he became Flash. But that didn't work with Green Lantern because none of those Green Lanterns did that. You had Kyle, at that time, Hal Jordan was the villain in the story, so he didn't want to be like Hal Jordan. Guy Gardner never wanted to be like anybody, so that's out. And if you look at John Stewart, all I can remember about John Stewart is him allowing an entire race of people to die, an entire planet to die in Cosmic Odyssey because of his hubris, because he was so prideful. He was not striving to be that hero that Hal Jordan was. And that's the difference. When you have a character that DC took and it paid homage to those older characters, those older stories, and those older heroes and tried to be that hero, but then developed into a new hero, it worked. Another example of that would be Nightwing. Because, again, I read Nightwing from issue #1, and I think it was in issue #1 of Nightwing where Dick Grayson said to himself, I always thought I would be Batman. But I don't want to be Batman anymore. I don't want to live in the darkness. I want to live in the light. And that's why he became Nightwing. So he did pay homage to Batman. And he did want to be Batman. But in being a hero for so long by himself, he developed into a separate hero, which was great. And it worked. And let's look at some of the Young Justice characters. Now, I know some of them are probably not going to be around in 15 years. I really don't like Impulse. I don't think Impulse is a good character. But then again, let's look at Blue Beetle. Blue Beetle, the new Blue Beetle, was one of the things that dragged me back into comics. Because that series, its original series of the new Blue Beetle, that story paid homage not just to Ted Kord, DC's Blue Beetle, but to the Blue Beetle before that. From Carlton Comics, this story was an homage to that character even before it was owned by DC. And he became his own hero. It was great. Some of these characters in Young Justice don't have that. Some do. And that's what DC does. They try, and it works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. But it doesn't work for Marvel. I seriously can't remember it working off the top of my head anyways, really, for Marvel at any time. I remember in the 90s, where they tried to replace Thor with Thunderstrike. It didn't work. When they tried in the 80s to replace Hulk with Rick Jones, it didn't work. When they tried to replace Captain America with Rick Jones, it didn't work. When they tried to replace Captain America with Bucky, it didn't work. it never worked for Marvel. And I would say it's because of how they structure stories. They were trying to make them step out of that shadow rather than to live in that shadow long enough for them to become their own hero. And since those kinds of things failed for Marvel, then they tried to make new characters that would just develop with the rest of the universe. And my example of that would be New Warriors. I read New Warriors from issue number 1. I always wanted it to do well, but it always fell flat for me. It really did. It had a couple of heroes on there, well, at least one, that did do that, that paid homage to their namesake. It would be Nemorita. If that's how you say her name, I really hope you do. But she was in Namor's book for a while. You know, she was there with her cousin. She was trying to be like him. And I think that character really worked. I wish they still had her around. She's a great character. But none of the other characters really worked in that way. You know, you had Lance Astrovic saying he's the new Captain America from the future. It didn't work. And these characters that you see now in the Champions, you know, somebody like Kamala Khan. Kamala Khan, would she be around in 15 years? Maybe. They maybe want to push it so much that she will be still around in 15 years, but she'll have the relevance of somebody like Speedball, right? One of those characters from the New Warriors that no one even probably thinks about at all anymore, but he's still around. It's going to be that kind of thing. And I really think that the greatest example of why Marvel fails at this is what they did recently. All you have to do is look at Jane Foster's Thor, Amadeus Cho Hulk, or Sam Wilson Captain America. Any of those characters that they said, these are the replacements. We're just putting them in there. They're going to replace those other heroes. Those replacements never paid homage to their history, never paid homage to their namesakes, not in the way that they were trying to be that same hero and then in doing so became their own hero. That never happened. And they failed miserably. But at the same time, Marvel tried to make the new heroes again, just like the New Warriors. And those are the Champions, which started off, as they say, in the all-new, all-different Avengers. And these characters, again, are going to be forgotten. Because that slow, laborious process that DC uses is something that doesn't make massive amounts of money right off the bat. It takes years and sometimes decades for these characters to actually develop, and Marvel just won't wait that long. They just won't. That's not how they do things at Marvel. They need these things to take off right away. And since they don't put enough character into these characters for people to actually like and identify with them long enough for them to stay around for 10 or 20 years, then they just fail. And again, really, that's all I had to say today, that Marvel is going to fail because it doesn't take the time to actually develop new characters in the way that DC does. And Marvel looks like it's becoming exhausted, whereas DC is the tortoise. You know, just slow and steady, going at its own pace, still going to chug along for another 50 years. So, if I gave you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me whether you see this within the characters of these universes. Tell me which of these two universes you think will be around in 50 years. Tell me which one of these two teams you think will be around in 10 to 15 years. Or if any of these characters at all will be around. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.